Victoria Chen had been cleaning office buildings for 15 years, but she had never seen anyone sleep so restlessly. The CEO of Meridian Industries lay sprawled across his leather couch at 3 in the morning, papers scattered around him like fallen snow, his expensive suit wrinkled beyond recognition. Dark circles shadowed his eyes even in sleep, and his breathing was shallow, uneven. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She should have left him alone. Protocol dictated that she clean around executives quietly, never disturb them, never acknowledge their presence beyond a respectful nod. But something about the way his shoulders trembled, the way he clutched a faded photograph against his chest, even unconscious, made her pause. Victoria quietly reached for the spare blanket she kept in her cleaning cart for cold nights in the supply closet. Her grandmother had always said that sleep was sacred, that disturbing someone's rest invited bad luck. But covering them, protecting them from the cold, that was mercy. She unfolded the soft gray blanket and gently draped it over Alexander Kane's sleeping form, careful not to wake him. She didn't know that this single act of kindness would unravel both their carefully constructed worlds. Alexander woke to unfamiliar warmth. For a moment, disoriented and heavy with exhaustion, he couldn't place where he was. The photograph of his daughter Sophia still pressed against his palm, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. Then he saw the blanket, soft and clean, covering him like a gentle embrace. He sat up slowly, scanning the empty office. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in golden light. His watch read 7:30. He had slept for 4 hours, the longest stretch he'd managed in months. The blanket slipped from his shoulders as he stood, and he caught it instinctively, bringing it to his face. It smelled like lavender and something indefinable, something that reminded him of home before everything fell apart. Alexander had been living in his office for 3 weeks now, ever since the custody hearing that stripped him of weekend visits with Sophia. His ex-wife's lawyer had painted him as a workaholic who prioritized profit over parenting, a man who forgot birthdays and missed school plays. They weren't entirely wrong, but they didn't understand the pressure, the crushing weight of running a company his father had built from nothing. Every decision affected hundreds of employees, thousands of investors. How could he explain that his work wasn't just ambition, but responsibility, a legacy he was terrified of destroying? He folded the blanket carefully, running his fingers along its edges. Someone had covered him while he slept, someone who worked in this building but remained invisible to him. The cleaning staff. He felt a strange tug in his chest, a gratitude mixed with embarrassment. When had anyone last shown him such simple kindness? That evening, Alexander found himself staying late again. But this time, he wasn't drowning in spreadsheets. He was waiting. At precisely 11:45, he heard the soft whir of a vacuum cleaner in the distance, the gentle clink of supplies being moved. He positioned himself on the couch, pretending to read quarterly reports while stealing glances at the frosted glass doors. The door opened with a soft whisper, and a small woman entered pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. She moved with quiet efficiency, dusting surfaces and emptying trash bins without looking in his direction. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore the standard gray uniform of the cleaning company. But there was something graceful about the way she worked, something deliberate and caring in how she handled even mundane tasks. Victoria felt eyes on her but didn't look up. The CEO was awake tonight, watching her from behind his stack of papers. She had hoped he wouldn't notice the blanket, that he would wake up confused and forget about it entirely. Now she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with her job security. She had been invisible for so long that being seen felt almost painful. 15 years of cleaning offices, emptying trash bins, scrubbing floors until they gleamed. 15 years of being part of the scenery, background noise in other people's important lives. She preferred it that way. Invisibility was safety. Invisibility meant no one asked questions about her past, about why a woman with a master's degree in literature was pushing a cleaning cart through corporate hallways at midnight. As she approached the area near his desk, Alexander cleared his throat softly. Victoria froze, dust cloth suspended in midair. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentler than she expected. "I wanted to thank you for the blanket." Victoria's cheeks flushed. She nodded quickly, not trusting her voice, and resumed dusting with increased focus. Alexander watched her for a moment longer, then returned to his papers. But the silence between them felt different now, charged with acknowledgement. The next morning, Alexander arrived at his office to find the blanket neatly folded on his desk, with a small note tucked beneath it. The handwriting was careful, elegant. "Sleep is healing. Take care of yourself." The handler V. He stared at the note for a long time, tracing the letter V with his fingertip. Victoria. It had to be. He'd never thought to learn the names of the cleaning staff, had never considered them as individuals with their own stories, their own struggles. The realization sat heavy in his stomach, another mark against the man he'd become. That night, he left his own note tucked under a coffee mug on his desk. "Thank you for your kindness. It meant more than you know. A." The exchange became a ritual. Every few days, a small note would appear. Never more than a sentence or two. Victoria would write about the changing seasons visible from the 40th floor, about how the morning light painted the city in watercolors. Alexander would respond with fragments of gratitude, small observations about the world he'd forgotten to notice. Through these paper conversations, walls began to crumble. Victoria learned that the CEO who seemed to have everything was sleeping in his office because he couldn't bear the emptiness of his penthouse apartment. Alexander discovered that the woman who cleaned his office wrote poetry on her breaks, that she noticed beauty in places he'd overlooked for years. 3 weeks into their correspondence, Alexander made a decision that would surprise even himself. He stayed late again, but this time, when Victoria entered his office, he was standing by the window, the blanket draped over his arm. "I've been thinking," he said without turning around, "about invisibility. About how easy it is to overlook the people who make our lives possible." Victoria stopped pushing her cart, hands tightening on the handle. She wasn't sure where this conversation was leading, but something in his tone made her listen. "I don't even know your last name," Alexander continued, finally turning to face her. "I don't know anything about you, except that you write beautiful notes and you showed kindness to a stranger. That says more about me than it does about you." Victoria lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze for the first time. "Chen," she said quietly. "Victoria Chen." "Victoria Chen," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "Would you mind if I asked you something, Victoria?" She shrugged, a gesture that could have meant yes or no. "Why did you cover me with the blanket? You could have lost your job if someone complained." Victoria was quiet for so long that Alexander thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My daughter used to have nightmares, terrible ones after the accident. She would fall asleep on the couch sometimes, and I would always cover her with a blanket. It made her feel safe, even when she was already sleeping." She paused, swallowing hard. "You looked like someone who needed to feel safe." The photograph. The one he clutched while sleeping. Victoria had seen it, had recognized the... Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Protective way he held it even unconscious. She understood because she was a mother too, because loss had a language that transcended words. "Where is she now?" Alexander asked gently. "Your daughter?" Victoria's composure finally cracked. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Gone. Car accident 2 years ago. She was 16. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of shared understanding, of two people who had lost the most important parts of themselves and were still learning how to breathe. "I have a daughter too," Alexander said finally. "Sophia. She's 8. I'm losing her in a different way." Victoria nodded, seeing something in his face that she recognized. The guilt, the desperate love, the fear that you failed the one person who mattered most. Over the following weeks, their late-night conversations became less about notes and more about words spoken aloud. Victoria would clean while Alexander worked, but now they talked. Small things at first, observations about the weather, comments about the city lights. But gradually the conversations deepened. Alexander learned that Victoria had been a high school English teacher before the accident, that she'd lost her job when grief made it impossible to function in a classroom full of teenagers the same age as her daughter. She'd taken the cleaning job because it required no emotional investment, no connections that could be severed by loss. Victoria discovered that Alexander's workaholic tendencies had intensified after his divorce, that he buried himself in contracts and mergers to avoid facing the emptiness at home. His ex-wife accused him of loving the company more than his family, but the truth was more complicated. Work was predictable. Work had clear objectives and measurable outcomes. Love was chaos, vulnerable and terrifying in its uncertainty. One Thursday night in November, Victoria arrived at the office to find Alexander sitting on the floor beside his desk, surrounded by scattered papers and looking utterly defeated. A photo lay face up beside him, a little girl with curly brown hair and his same gray eyes, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. "Sophia?" Victoria asked gently. Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice. Victoria set down her supplies and sat on the floor across from him, careful to maintain respectful distance. "What happened?" "Custody modification hearing. Final decision came through today." His voice was hoarse. "Monthly supervised visits, that's all I get. 4 hours a month with my own daughter." Victoria studied his face, seeing the devastation there. "What did they say? In court?" Alexander laughed bitterly. "That I'm emotionally unavailable, that I missed too many important events, that Sophia barely knows me anymore." He picked up the photograph, cradling it like something precious. "They're not wrong. I thought providing for her was enough. I thought if I could build something lasting, something secure, it would matter more than bedtime stories and soccer games." "Maybe it's not too late," Victoria said quietly. "She doesn't even want to see me. Last visit, she spent the whole time drawing pictures and wouldn't talk to me. Just sat there coloring while I tried to think of something, anything, to say to my own child." Victoria was quiet for a moment, then reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out a small notebook. She tore out a page and handed it to Alexander along with a pencil. "What's this for?" "Write her a letter, not about the custody battle or the divorce. Just tell her one thing you love about her, one memory that makes you smile." Alexander stared at the blank paper. "I don't know how to do that. I've never been good with words." "Start with 'Dear Sophia,'" Victoria suggested. "The rest will come." Alexander began to write, slowly at first, then with increasing fluency. He wrote about the time Sophia was 4 and insisted on helping him make pancakes, how she'd gotten flour in her hair and syrup on her pajamas but had been so proud of the lopsided results. He wrote about her laugh, about the way she used to fall asleep in his lap during movie nights, about how she'd always been brave enough to try new things. When he finished, his eyes were wet. Victoria read the letter over his shoulder, and something shifted in her chest. This wasn't the cold businessman she'd imagined. This was a father who loved his daughter but had forgotten how to show it. "Send it to her," Victoria said. "What if she doesn't respond? Then you write another one, and another, until she remembers that her father sees her, really sees her." Alexander folded the letter carefully. "Why are you helping me?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to lose a daughter, and I know what it's like to blame yourself. The difference is, you still have a chance to fix things." The letters became Alexander's new ritual. Every few days, he would write to Sophia, sharing memories, asking about her life, telling her about books he thought she might like or places he wanted to take her. He didn't know if she read them, but he kept writing. Meanwhile, Victoria found herself looking forward to their conversations with an intensity that surprised her. Alexander had begun asking about her daughter Maya, about her teaching career, about the poetry she wrote in the margins of her cleaning schedule. He listened with genuine interest, as if her words mattered. One evening in December, Victoria arrived at the office carrying a small, wrapped package. Alexander looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. "Early Christmas present," she said, setting it beside his keyboard. "Open it." Inside was a slim book of poetry, well-worn and marked with handwritten notes in the margins. "Maya's favorite," Victoria explained. "She used to quote Emily Dickinson constantly. Drove me crazy at the time." Alexander opened to a marked page and read aloud. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Maya said that Hope was stubborn, Victoria continued, that it stayed even when everything else left. Alexander closed the book gently, running his thumb over the cover. I haven't hoped for anything in a long time. Maybe it's time to start? 2 days later, Alexander received a response to one of his letters. Not from Sophia, but from his ex-wife Karen. The message was brief but not unkind. Sophia has been reading your letters. She won't admit it, but I've seen her with them. She's curious about the father who suddenly remembers her favorite color is purple and that she's afraid of thunderstorms. Keep writing. Alexander stared at the message until the words blurred. Then he immediately sat down to write another letter, this one about the purple scarf Sophia had worn to her 6th birthday party, about how beautiful she'd looked, spinning in circles until she fell down dizzy and laughing. Victoria found him at his desk an hour later, surrounded by crumpled drafts and looking simultaneously frustrated and hopeful. Good news? She asked. She's reading them. Sophia. She's reading my letters. Victoria's smile was radiant. I told you Hope was stubborn. As winter deepened, something unexpected began to bloom in the sterile environment of the corporate office. Victoria would bring thermoses of homemade soup on particularly cold nights, insisting that Alexander needed proper nutrition. Alexander would leave books on his desk for Victoria to discover, carefully chosen volumes of poetry and essays he thought she might enjoy. They never spoke about what was happening between them. Neither wanted to name it, to risk shattering the fragile connection they'd built in the shadows of midnight conversations and shared vulnerability. But they both felt it, the way the office felt warmer when they were both there, the way ordinary moments became memorable when witnessed by the other. One snowy Thursday in January, Victoria didn't come to work. Alexander waited until nearly 2 in the morning, pacing by the windows, watching the snow accumulate on the glass. She had never missed a night without warning him first. By morning, his concern had transformed into something approaching panic. He did something he'd never done before. He called the cleaning company directly, identifying himself and asking about Victoria Chen's schedule. The supervisor seemed surprised to receive a call from a client about a specific employee, but eventually confirmed that Victoria had called in sick. Alexander spent the day distracted, snapping at assistants and abandoning meetings early. That evening, instead of staying at the office, he did something that would have shocked his corporate board. He looked up Victoria's address in the employee files and drove to her apartment in Queens. Victoria's building was old but well-maintained, the kind of place where neighbors still looked out for each other. Alexander climbed 3 flights of stairs, his expensive shoes echoing in the narrow hallway. When he knocked on apartment 3B, there was no answer at first. Then he heard movement, slow and careful. Victoria opened the door wearing pajamas and a thick robe, her face flushed with fever. She stared at him in shock, as if he were a hallucination brought on by illness. Alexander, what are you doing here? You weren't at work. I was worried. She blinked slowly, processing this information. You came to check on me? Can I come in? You look terrible. Victoria laughed, a sound roughened by congestion. Thanks. Really know how to charm a lady. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with books and photographs, and the kind of lived-in comfort Alexander's penthouse lacked. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on the coffee table beside a mug of cold tea and a box of tissues. How long have you been sick? Alexander asked, automatically moving to feel her forehead with the back of his hand. Just since yesterday. It's nothing serious, just a cold. Have you eaten anything? Victoria shrugged. Wasn't really hungry. Alexander looked around the small kitchen, taking inventory. Do you have soup? Anything substantial? Alexander, you don't need to. Yes, I do. The certainty in his voice surprised them both. You've been taking care of me for months. Let me return the favor. He found canned soup in her cabinet and set about heating it on the stove, moving with the careful precision he brought to everything. Victoria watched from the couch, wrapped in blankets, struck by the surreal image of a CEO in a $1,000 suit serving her chicken noodle soup. This is very domestic of you, she said when he handed her the bowl. Don't get used to it. I usually live on takeout and coffee. Victoria sipped the soup slowly, studying his face. Why did you really come here, Alexander? He sat in the chair across from her, suddenly uncertain. I don't know, When you weren't there tonight, the office felt wrong. Empty in a way it hasn't felt since we started talking. You could have called. I wanted to see you. To make sure you were okay. He paused. I think I needed to see you. The admission hung between them, weighted with implication. Victoria set down her soup bowl and pulled her robe tighter around herself. Alexander. I know this is complicated. I know we're from different worlds, different circumstances. But these past few months, talking with you, learning about you, it's been the best part of my days, the only part that felt real. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. What about Sophia? Your custody situation? She wrote me back. Last week. Just a few lines. But she signed it. Love. Sophia. It's the first time she's used that word with me in over a year. That's wonderful. It is. And I owe that to you. To your encouragement. To keep writing. To keep trying. Alexander leaned forward. Victoria, I don't know what this is between us, but I know I don't want to lose it. Victoria closed her eyes, and Alexander saw her internal struggle play out across her face. When she opened them again, there were tears there. I'm scared, she whispered. Of what? Of caring about someone again. Of having something to lose. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When Maya died, I thought I would die too. The only way I survived was by shutting down. By making myself invisible. If I let myself care about you, about Sophia, about this life you're building back together. Tao, what happens when it ends? Alexander moved to sit beside her on the couch, careful not to crowd her. What happens if it doesn't end? What if we're brave enough to try? Victoria looked at him through her tears, seeing not the intimidating CEO, but the man who wrote letters to his daughter, who noticed when she was absent, who drove through snow to bring her soup. I don't know how to be in someone's life anymore, she said. I don't know how to be visible. Then we'll learn together. Slowly. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility. Victoria reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. Maya used to say that love was the bravest thing people could do. I haven't felt brave in a very long time. Maybe bravery isn't about not being scared. Maybe it's about being scared and choosing to try anyway. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching snow fall past the window. Neither of them spoke about the future, about the obstacles they would face, or the questions that remained unanswered. For now, it was enough to sit together in the warm glow of the lamp, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. 2 months later, Alexander received the phone call he'd been hoping for since the custody hearing. Karen's voice was different this time, less guarded. Sophia wants to see you. Not a supervised visit. She asked specifically if she could spend Saturday afternoon with you. Alexander gripped the phone tighter. Really? She's been different since you started writing to her. More open, more willing to talk about you. I think your letters helped her remember who you were before things got complicated. What changed her mind? Honestly, the poem you sent last week. The one about Maya. Alexander had written about Victoria's daughter in his most recent letter to Sophia. About how Maya had loved poetry and purple sweaters, and the way snow looked like magic. He'd wanted Sophia to understand that loss was part of life, but so was love, so was connection. She wants to meet Victoria, Karen continued. She said anyone who could inspire you to write poetry must be pretty special. Alexander felt his chest tighten with emotion. Would that be okay with you? I think it might be good for all of you. Sophia needs to see that you're capable of caring about more than just work. And Alexander? Don't screw this up. That Saturday, Alexander found himself more nervous than he'd been for any board meeting or corporate merger. He'd arranged to meet Sophia at the park near her mother's house, and Victoria had agreed to join them for ice cream afterward if things went well. Sophia was waiting on a bench when he arrived, swinging her legs and clutching a small notebook to her chest. She looked older than he remembered, more thoughtful, but her smile when she saw him was genuine. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, sweetheart. I missed you." They walked through the park together, and Alexander was amazed by how much Sophia had changed. She asked about his work, about the letters he'd written, about the woman who had taught him that words could be gifts. When she pulled out her notebook and showed him poems she'd written, Alexander felt pride swell in his chest. "This one's about snow," Sophia said, reading from a page covered in careful cursive. "And this one's about missing people. Maya taught me that it's okay to write about sad things." "Maya?" "Victoria's daughter. I read about her in your letters. I think she would have been a good big sister." Alexander had to pause, overwhelmed by his daughter's empathy, by her ability to understand loss and love in the same breath. An hour later, they met Victoria at the ice cream shop Alexander had chosen, specifically because it was loud and casual, the kind of place where nervous conversation could hide in ambient noise. But the nerves proved unnecessary. Sophia took to Victoria immediately, asking about her favorite books, her poetry, her memories of Maya. Victoria answered each question with gentle honesty, never talking down to Sophia, but never overwhelming her with adult complexity. When Sophia shyly showed Victoria her notebook, Victoria read each poem with the attention she would have given published literature. "You have a gift," Victoria told Sophia seriously. "Maya would have loved these, especially this one about snow looking like wishes falling from the sky." Sophia beamed. "Dad says you write poems too." "I do. Maybe sometime we could write one together." Alexander watched this exchange with wonder. Two people he cared about, connecting over words and art, and the memory of a girl who would have loved them both. It felt like healing, like hope made manifest. As they walked back to Alexander's car, Sophia slipped her hand into Victoria's. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said. "Of course. Do you think my dad is getting better at being a dad?" Victoria glanced at Alexander, who was listening with obvious anxiety. "I think your dad loves you very much," Victoria said carefully. "And I think love sometimes needs practice to get good at showing itself." Sophia nodded seriously. "Mom says love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling. Your mom is very wise. Are you going to keep teaching him about showing love?" Victoria stopped walking, crouching down to Sophia's eye level. "Sweetheart, your dad doesn't need anyone to teach him how to love you. He just needed to remember that love is braver when it's shared." That evening, after returning Sophia to Karen's house, Alexander and Victoria sat in his car outside Victoria's apartment building. The day had been perfect, but they both felt the weight of what came next. "She's incredible," Victoria said. "Smart and kind and so much like you. She liked you. Really liked you." "The feeling is mutual." Alexander turned to face her fully. "Victoria, I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't work. But today, watching you with Sophia, seeing how natural you were together, Alexander, I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been since the night you covered me with that blanket. I don't know how to navigate this, how to balance everything, but I know I want to try." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the streetlights reflecting on wet pavement. "I'm already in love with you," she said finally. "I have been for weeks. That's what terrifies me." Alexander reached for her hand. "Then let's be terrified together." 6 months later, Alexander's office looked completely different. The sterile corporate space had been softened with personal touches. Framed photos of Sophia, books of poetry on the shelves, a small plant that Victoria had insisted would improve the air quality. The blanket that had started everything was folded neatly on the couch, no longer a symbol of exhaustion but of the moment when two lonely people found each other. Victoria still worked for the cleaning company, But now she also tutored struggling students in literature and poetry. Alexander had discovered that his company's community outreach budget could support educational programs, and Victoria's literacy initiative had become one of their flagship charitable efforts. Sophia spent every other weekend with Alexander now, and she'd begun asking when Victoria would be joining them. The answer came sooner than anyone expected, in the form of a simple question asked over pancakes on a Sunday morning. "Victoria," Sophia said, syrup dripping from her fork, "would you like to be my stepmom?" Alexander nearly choked on his coffee. Victoria set down her own fork very carefully. "Sweetheart, that's not really how it works." "Dad loves you," Sophia continued matter-of-factly, "and you love him, and you both love me. Maya would want me to have someone who loves poetry as much as she did." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "How do you know what Maya would want?" "Because I asked her. In my dreams. She said love makes families, not just blood." Alexander looked at Victoria across the table, seeing his own wonder reflected in her face. They hadn't talked about marriage, hadn't discussed the future beyond their next planned weekend together. But Sophia's innocent logic cut through all their careful caution. "What do you think?" Alexander asked Victoria quietly. "I think," Victoria said, reaching for both their hands, "that Maya was right about love being the bravest thing people can do." 1 year later, on a snowy December evening exactly 2 years after Victoria had first covered Alexander with a blanket, they gathered in the same office where their story began, but now the space was filled with family and friends, with flowers and soft lighting and the kind of joy that transforms ordinary places into sacred ones. Alexander and Victoria exchanged vows they had written together, words about second chances and unexpected love, about the courage to hope again after loss. Sophia served as both flower girl and poetry reader, sharing a piece she'd written about families that choose each other. The photograph from Alexander's divorce hearing had been replaced by a new family portrait, Alexander, Victoria, and Sophia laughing together in Central Park, with Maya's memory honored by the purple ribbon Victoria wore in her hair. When the simple ceremony concluded, when the last guest had left and the office was quiet again, Alexander and Victoria found themselves alone in the space where everything had changed. "Do you ever think about that night?" Alexander asked, fingertips tracing the edge of the blanket that now lived in their shared home. "Every day," Victoria replied. "I think about how close we came to missing each other entirely. If I'd worked a different building, if you'd gone home that night, if I'd followed protocol and left you alone. But you didn't. You chose kindness over safety, connection over invisibility." Victoria smiled, pulling him closer. "Maya used to say that the best stories begin with someone doing something they're not supposed to do. Smart girl. She would have loved you, and Sophia would have adored her." They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the city lights, at the world that had brought them together in the most impossible way. Tomorrow, Victoria would start her new job as head of Alexander's charitable foundation. Tomorrow, Sophia would join them for the dinner she'd been planning for weeks. Tomorrow, their new life would continue to unfold. But tonight, they simply held each other in the place where love had found them, two people who had learned that sometimes the greatest courage is found in the smallest gestures, that hope can be as simple as covering a stranger with a blanket, and that the best families are built not from perfection but from the brave decision to keep choosing each other, one day at a time. In the end, it wasn't grand gestures or dramatic declarations that changed their lives. It was kindness offered without expectation, love given without guarantee, and the quiet recognition that everyone deserves to feel safe while they sleep. It was the understanding that invisibility is sometimes protection, but visibility, being truly seen by another person, is where healing begins. And it all started with a blanket, a moment of compassion, and two broken people who discovered that their pieces fit together in ways they never could have imagined. 3 years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. The offices of Meridian Industries had transformed under Alexander's leadership, becoming a place where employees felt valued not just for their productivity, but for their humanity. The wellness program Victoria had helped design included meditation rooms, flexible schedules for parents, and a company-wide policy that no one should have to choose between family and career. Alexander's relationship with Sophia had blossomed beyond anything he'd dared hope. She was 11 now, confident and articulate, spending half her time at their home in Brooklyn Heights. The penthouse apartment had been sold years ago, replaced by a brownstone with a garden where Victoria grew herbs, and Sophia wrote poetry under the apple tree they'd planted in Maya's memory. The Literacy Foundation had expanded to serve 12 schools across the city. Victoria had discovered that her gift for seeing the invisible extended beyond Alexander to the children who struggled with reading, who felt overlooked or forgotten in overcrowded classrooms. She had a particular talent for reaching the quiet ones, the children who carried grief or trauma in small bodies that seemed too young for such heavy burdens. On this particular Tuesday evening, Victoria was working late at the foundation offices, reviewing applications for their new scholarship program. The space was warm and inviting, painted in soft blues and greens, with comfortable reading nooks and walls lined with donated books. Nothing like the sterile corporate environment where she'd once pushed a cleaning cart through empty hallways. Alexander found her there at nearly 9 o'clock, surrounded by student essays and recommendation letters, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she made careful notes in the margins. "You know," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk, "I remember when you used to scold me for working too late." Victoria looked up, smiling. "That was different. You were hiding from life. I'm trying to change lives." "Fair point." Alexander glanced at the papers spread across her desk. "Find any promising candidates?" Victoria's expression grew thoughtful. "There's one application that's been on my mind all day." She pulled a folder from the stack. "A 16-year-old named Marcus. Lost both parents in a car accident last year, living with his grandmother. He wrote his essay about how reading poetry helped him process grief." Alexander leaned forward, recognizing the tone in Victoria's voice. It was the same gentle intensity she'd had when talking about her students back when she was teaching, before tragedy had stolen her confidence in her ability to guide young minds. "What's special about him? He quotes Maya Angelou and Emily Dickinson, but he also writes about finding hope in hip-hop lyrics and graphic novels. He understands that poetry exists everywhere, not just in classics." Victoria traced the edge of the application with her fingertip. "His English teacher says he's brilliant but struggling. Grief makes it hard to concentrate, hard to believe in the future." "Sounds familiar," Alexander said quietly. Victoria nodded. "I was thinking we could do more than just fund his college tuition. What if we created a mentorship component, pair students like Marcus with adults who've navigated similar losses?" Alexander watched his wife's face light up as she outlined her vision. Even after 3 years of marriage, he still felt amazed by her capacity to transform pain into purpose, to see possibility where others saw only problems. "You want to start with Marcus?" he said. "It wasn't a question. I want to be his mentor, if he's willing." Victoria hesitated. "I know it might bring up difficult memories, working with a teenager who lost his parents. But maybe that's exactly why I should do it." "What does Sophia think?" Victoria smiled. "She's the one who suggested it. She said Maya would want her story to help other kids who are hurting." The next week, Marcus Williams sat nervously in the Foundation's main conference room, fidgeting with the sleeves of his too large hoodie. He was tall and lean, all elbows and uncertainty, with intelligent dark eyes that held too much knowledge about loss for someone so young. Victoria entered carrying 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, setting one in front of Marcus before taking the seat beside him, rather than across the imposing conference table. "I thought we could start with something simple," she said. "Tell me about the last book that made you feel something." Marcus blinked, clearly expecting a more formal interview. "You mean like for school?" "I mean any book, comic book, novel, poetry collection. Something that reached inside you and moved things around." For the first time since arriving, Marcus relaxed slightly. "There's this graphic novel series called The Graveyard Shift. It's about kids who can communicate with spirits, helping them find peace." "I know it sounds weird, but it doesn't sound weird at all. Keep going." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he described the characters, the way the author used visual storytelling to explore themes of loss and connection. Victoria listened with the same focused attention she'd once given to Alexander's midnight confessions, drawing out details and insights with gentle questions. "The main character lost her mom when she was little," Marcus continued. "She spends the whole first volume angry at everyone, including the dead people who need her help. But then she realizes that anger is just grief wearing a disguise." Victoria felt her breath catch. "That's a beautiful way to put it. Did you ever read to your daughter? Marcus asked suddenly. Your application mentioned that you had a daughter who passed away. Victoria nodded, surprised by the directness of the question, but not uncomfortable with it. Every night until she was too old to admit she still liked it, Maya loved stories where ordinary people discovered they had extraordinary gifts. Like being able to help ghosts find peace? Exactly like that, Victoria smiled. I think she would have loved the graveyard shift. Over the following months, Marcus became a regular presence at the foundation. His weekly sessions with Victoria evolved from formal mentoring meetings to genuine friendship. He helped her catalog new book donations, assisted with reading programs at local elementary schools, and gradually began sharing his own writing. Alexander watched this relationship develop with quiet amazement. Victoria had found her way back to teaching, but this time on her own terms, with a student who needed exactly what she had to offer. Marcus, meanwhile, began to flourish under her attention. His grades improved, but more importantly, his perspective on the future began to shift from resignation to possibility. One evening in late spring, Marcus arrived at the foundation carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression Victoria had learned to recognize as nervous excitement. I did something, he announced without preamble. I entered a poetry contest. The deadline was yesterday, and I almost didn't submit it, but then I thought about what you said about courage being a choice we make every day. Victoria set down the grant proposal she'd been reviewing. What kind of contest? The citywide Young Writers Competition. First prize is $1,000 in publication in the literary magazine. Marcus shifted his weight from foot to foot. I wrote about my parents, about the accident, about how reading helped me find them again in words. Marcus, that's wonderful. How do you feel about sharing something so personal? Terrified, he admitted. But also, ready? Like, maybe it's time to stop hiding from my story and start telling it instead. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Maya used to say that the stories we're most afraid to tell are usually the ones the world most needs to hear. Would you read it? Before I lose my nerve completely? Marcus handed her the envelope with trembling fingers. Victoria opened it carefully, unfolding several typed pages. The poem was titled, The Space Between Breathing, and began with the moment before impact, the ordinary Tuesday when everything changed. But it didn't stay in that dark place. Instead, it traced Marcus's journey through grief, through the discovery that love doesn't end with death, but transforms into something more permanent, more profound. The final stanza made Victoria's breath catch. They live now in the pause between words, in the space where silence holds meaning. In every story that teaches me love is the only thing that survives translation from life to memory to hope. When Victoria looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. Marcus, this is extraordinary. It's honest and beautiful and brave. You think it has a chance? I think it has more than a chance. I think it's going to touch people in ways you can't imagine. 2 months later, Victoria received a phone call that made her rush from her office to find Alexander in the middle of a board meeting. She slipped him a note that made him excuse himself immediately. Marcus won, she whispered as soon as they were alone in the hallway. First place. They want to feature his story in next month's issue. Alexander pulled her into his arms, spinning her around in the corporate hallway like they were teenagers. I'm so proud of him, of you, of what you've built together. That evening, they celebrated at Marcus's favorite restaurant, a small Dominican place near his grandmother's apartment. Sophia, now 13 and even more articulate than her father, interviewed Marcus with the seriousness of a professional journalist about his writing process and his plans for the prize money. I want to start a scholarship fund, Marcus announced, for kids who've lost parents. College is important, but what really saved me was having someone who understood, who could help me find my voice again. Victoria reached across the table to squeeze his hand. What would you call it? Marcus smiled. The Maya Chen Memorial Scholarship, if that's okay with you. Victoria couldn't speak around the sudden tightness in her throat. Alexander answered for her, his own voice rough with emotion. "I think Maya would be honored." Later that night, as they walked through Prospect Park under the soft glow of streetlights, Victoria reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. 3 years ago, she'd been invisible, moving through the world like a ghost herself. Now she was surrounded by chosen family, engaged in work that mattered, helping young people find their voices just as Alexander had once helped her find hers. "Do you ever miss it?" Alexander asked, as if reading her thoughts. "The simplicity of those early days? When it was just us and the midnight conversations?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "I miss the intensity of those first discoveries about each other, but I don't miss the loneliness, the fear of letting anyone matter." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, we still have midnight conversations. They're just usually about Sophia's college applications, or Marcus's latest poem, instead of our own broken hearts." Speaking of Sophia's college applications, Alexander said carefully, "She wants to study education. Says she wants to be like you, helping kids who feel invisible." Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "What do you think about that?" "I think she's learned from the best. You've shown both of us that the most important work isn't always the most visible work." They reached the pond at the center of the park, its surface reflecting the moon and the scattered lights of the city beyond. Victoria thought about all the invisible moments that had led them here. Her decision to cover a sleeping stranger with a blanket, Alexander's choice to write letters to his daughter, Marcus's courage to share his story with the world. "You know what I've learned?" Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Healing isn't a destination. It's a practice. Every day, we choose whether to build walls or bridges, whether to hide from love or move toward it." Alexander nodded, thinking of his relationship with Sophia, which continued to deepen and evolve. And sometimes the bridges we build for ourselves end up helping other people cross their own rivers. "Maya would have loved Marcus," Victoria said suddenly. "She would have loved seeing how many lives one act of kindness can touch." "She would have loved you for carrying her forward," Alexander replied, "for making sure her light keeps shining in new places." As they walked home through the quiet Brooklyn streets, Victoria felt the profound satisfaction of a life rebuilt with intention, brick by careful brick. The cleaning cart and gray uniform belonged to a different woman, one who had been drowning in grief and couldn't imagine a future beyond survival. This Victoria, wife, mentor, foundation director, had been born from ashes but built from hope. Tomorrow, Marcus would start his senior year of high school, with confidence and a scholarship already secured. Tomorrow, Sophia would continue her own journey toward adulthood, armed with the knowledge that families can be chosen and love can be rebuilt after loss. Tomorrow, Alexander would lead his company with the understanding that true success is measured not just in profits but in the lives touched and transformed. And tomorrow, Victoria would wake up in a home filled with laughter and literature, surrounded by people who saw her not as invisible but as essential, not as broken but as beautifully, courageously whole. It had all begun with a simple act of kindness in an empty office building, with a revolutionary idea that everyone deserves to feel safe while they sleep. From that single moment of compassion had grown a love story, a family, a foundation, and a future none of them could have imagined when they were lost in their separate sorrows. The best stories, Victoria had learned, aren't the ones that begin with, "once upon a time." They're the ones that begin with, "once someone chose kindness," and grow from there into something magnificent and unexpected and true. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.